So my name's Fez. I was born and raised in Lancashire, and I'm currently 37 years old. I was born with chronic kidney disease due to reflux, so my bladder wouldn't empty correctly. The urine kept returning back to my kidneys, and inevitably they started to fail, basically. In my lifetime, I've had 3 kidney transplants, and I've used all modalities of dialysis within my lifetime. So I've pretty much been using, I guess, the healthcare system all my life at very different points, from pediatrics now to adults. I guess a difficult kind of transition point for me was when my second transplant failed and I was preparing to start hemodialysis. Having previously done peritoneal dialysis, which was a little bit more gentler on the system, and also being in pediatrics where my parents probably did a lot more of the heavy lifting, literally and figuratively, it was a lot easier, I guess, to handle in some aspects. Being in adults, it was pretty much on me, and also the fact of having to go through this process was quite daunting and scary. A fistula was created, and a fistula is basically where they get your main artery and main vein and make it into a bigger vessel on one of your arms generally. And then you have to put the needles there, and therefore the blood pump speed is sufficient enough for it to go through the machine for your blood to be cleaned. And that, in essence, what hemodialysis does, because there's no filter, because the kidneys have failed. So the dialysis machine does what the kidneys would do. So I was fairly young when I was about to start hemodialysis. So I had to withdraw from university for a start. So that caused a lot of, I guess, issues for me, because I didn't know at that point what I was going to do with my life either. And then, yeah, the whole aspect of trying to process hemodialysis and putting needles in yourself and, sitting on this machine for several hours a day. And it was all very much a time where I wanted to try and be young, so to speak, and still do things. But unfortunately, my health wouldn't let me, or my health circumstances wouldn't let me. I guess that's when I started really talking to the nursing team and trying to find out the best way to navigate dialysis, but also try and have a better quality of life when and where possible. So we had discussions about home dialysis at first. So I started to do the training in regards to home dialysis, going into the center, having conversations about the machine, how you set up the machine, the cleaning process, the setting up process. Also, obviously, having to get the courage to needle myself. So that took a while, because I wasn't great with the idea of sticking needles in myself. And, tips, tricks that I kind of learned and advice along the way, and just generally the training process. And when I was first at home after all the training, I was still a bit like, I'm doing this by myself kind of thing, a bit nervous. But some of the nursing staff would do home visits at the time as well to make sure everything was okay at home, make sure you're settled, make sure nothing drastically is, going wrong and everything is going well. And that worked really good for me. I then found out about nocturnal hemodialysis, so doing the dialysis whilst I sleep for longer hours to get better clearances in my blood. Unfortunately, at that time, my fistula failed, so it stopped working, and I ended up with a central line in my neck. Again, I constantly were having conversations about, how do I maintain this so this doesn't mess up in regards to my neckline, what happens in regards to showering, because you shouldn't get it wet and things like that. Where can I go to get the appropriate dressings? So these conversations were all had, how I should clean it, how I should maintain it, how I can, use the correct dressings for showering. And they all had adjustments that were made because I was doing much longer hours throughout the night in regards to blood clotting in the machine. So to make sure my blood wouldn't clot. And then I started nocturnal hemo. And again, it was generally the next day, because at nighttime there was generally no one on duty, although there was an on-call nurse. Unless there was an emergency, I wouldn't obviously call it on-call nurse. But generally the next day, for the first couple of weeks, someone would ring me up and say, how did your session go? Ask me about things, how it went, were there, numerous alarms, or were there a few? Do you understand why they happened? And kind of ran it through me over the phone. And that was really helpful as well. So yeah, I guess the whole hemodialysis process of just being on it, learning how to do things myself, being home and having the correct procedures and numbers and contacts in place when and if needed. And then as well with nocturnal, just that extra little adjustments that needed to be made, and especially with the neckline and not the fistula. So all throughout this kind of process, there was constant conversations, whether it be with the nursing team, whether it be a consultant, and there was always access to these people if I needed help at home. And for me, it worked out really well. I was feeling a lot better once I was settled on nocturnal, not just medically, but within myself. My quality of life was better. I was doing more volunteering and things like that, taking part in more courses, trying to learn more about myself and just advocating for myself, but also helping other patients where I could. So I guess the one piece of advice I would say would be, don't be afraid to ask questions, no matter how silly they may seem. Because that one question for me, I guess, in essence, changed my life. If I was stuck in the thinking of I had to go to the hospital 3 times a week to sit on the machine, I don't know if I'd be where I am today. The fact that I asked the question about home led me to learning more about what was happening to me, the processes, how to get home. So yeah, just ask questions if you have anything. And if it's hard to sometimes remember, jot them down, because I used to forget things. So I used to start jotting them down, whether it's on your phone, in your notes, or if you've got a notebook, wherever you find a place that works for you, jot those questions down and just ask them to the most relevant person that you can find who you are comfortable with. So I think in regards to the way I was approached by health professionals, it was very much kind of tailored to me. So they knew I was very much on the younger spectrum of their patient cohort. I think they understood that I was willing to learn, I was willing to try and get as much out of dialysis to live my life as best as I possibly could. And I think they recognized that, which was really great. So they would approach me with ideas sometimes, or they would ask me, what would work for you? And I think, at least with hemodialysis or dialysis in general, it's very much an individual thing. So I think knowing about your patients, knowing what works for them, what doesn't work for them, what kind of circumstances they might be in, are they studying? Do they have a family? Do they have to do the school run? Are they making dinner for the family every night, etc.? I think having that personal knowledge of your patients and then help tailor the care to that person as much as possible. There obviously will be certain restrictions in certain areas. I totally understand. But I think knowing as much about your patients as possible would probably be my best kind of advice.